For months, the strategy seemed clear. Through the long winter nights, as temperatures dropped and daylight faded early, Moscow intensified its campaign against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The idea, many analysts believed, was simple: relentless pressure. Drones humming through the dark, missiles cutting across the sky. Repeated strikes aimed not at frontline engagements, but at the systems that keep cities warm and lit. The calculation appeared cold and methodical. If power stations were damaged, if substations failed, if heating plants shut down, then entire neighborhoods would sit in darkness. Water pumps would falter. Radiators would cool. And perhaps, just perhaps, the discomfort would translate into political pressure. In early January, the tempo increased. After a major strike on January 9th, targeting key components of Ukraine's energy grid, Kremlin officials outlined their position with unmistakable clarity. Continued pressure would narrow Kyiv's options. As drones buzzed overhead and explosions echoed in the distance, official statements suggested that the corridor for decision-making was shrinking. The message was unmistakable: more pressure, more disruption, more leverage. Then came January 20th. In one of the largest waves of the winter campaign, Kyiv faced a barrage that included ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hundreds of attack drones. Air raid sirens wailed across the capital. Residents took shelter. Explosions rippled through the night. By morning, Ukraine reported a staggering count of incoming projectiles. Fires had broken out in parts of the city. On the left bank of Kyiv, water and electricity services were disrupted. Emergency crews moved quickly, assessing damage, restoring lines, stabilizing critical systems. Yet there was another side to the story. Air defense units worked relentlessly throughout the engagement. While some projectiles struck infrastructure, many were intercepted. The majority of the incoming drones and missiles failed to reach their intended targets. The damage was serious, but far from catastrophic. Still, the pressure did not ease. On January 24th, just hours after diplomatic discussions in Abu Dhabi explored the possibility of a ceasefire framework, another wave of strikes arrived. Sirens again. Explosions again. The pattern was becoming familiar. By January 25th, reports indicated that more than 800,000 residents in Kyiv were experiencing unstable access to electricity. Heating disruptions affected thousands of buildings. Emergency teams worked night after night, restoring power where possible, only to brace for the next engagement. The winter strategy had achieved partial results. Heating systems, many of them built during the Soviet era, relied on centralized plants that distributed warmth to entire districts. Targeting those facilities created ripple effects that were difficult to contain. But one expected outcome did not materialize. The Ukrainian public did not fracture. Despite the losses, despite the equipment destroyed, despite repeated advances in withdrawals in infrastructure stability, electricity on, electricity off, there was no visible collapse of resolve. And then the dynamic shifted. Late on January 25th, the focus turned northward across the border to Russia's Belgorod region. Belgorod has long served as a logistical hub in the conflict. Close to the Ukrainian border, it has supported equipment deliveries, troop rotations, and staging operations since the earliest days of the war. For years, many in Moscow likely assumed it would remain beyond serious reach. That assumption has been tested repeatedly. But this time was different. Authorities in Belgorod described what unfolded as one of the most intense engagements the region had experienced since the conflict began. Reports counted at least 50 explosions across the city and surrounding areas. Power outages spread across districts. Water supplies were disrupted in some neighborhoods. The Belgorod thermal power plant, responsible for supplying a significant portion of the region's heating, was reportedly struck multiple times. If confirmed, the implications were substantial. That single facility supports more than a third of the city's heating requirements. Suddenly, the winter equation looked different. Just days earlier, Kyiv had faced large-scale disruption to its heating systems. Now, Belgorod confronted similar instability. Russian regional officials acknowledged damage to energy facilities. Emergency crews responded to fires. Assessments were underway. Statements emphasized ongoing recovery efforts and claimed that many incoming projectiles had been intercepted. Independent verification remains complex in wartime conditions. But one fact was undeniable. The engagements had crossed the border. For Ukraine, the move carried both practical and symbolic weight. Practically, Belgorod's proximity makes it a critical logistical artery. Supplies, equipment, and reinforcements destined for frontline areas have historically passed through the region. Disrupting that flow, even temporarily, can complicate operational planning. Symbolically, it demonstrated reach. For months, Russia had signaled that energy infrastructure would remain a target. Now, energy infrastructure inside Russia was no longer immune. Neither side publicly celebrated the developments, nor did either side soften its rhetoric. The cycle of advances and withdrawals, of strikes and counterstrikes, continued. Speculation soon followed regarding the systems used in the Belgorod engagement. Analysts pointed to long-range rocket platforms capable of reaching border regions. Discussions also resurfaced about advanced missile systems and the complex approval mechanisms surrounding their use. Meanwhile, Russian media outlets reported significant Ukrainian losses in other operational zones. Ukrainian sources questioned those figures. As with many wartime claims, numbers varied widely depending on who presented them. Beyond the statistics and statements, a broader strategic pattern was emerging. Energy infrastructure, once considered secondary to frontline engagements, had become central. Heating plants, substations, power grids. These were no longer peripheral assets. They were leverage points. Each strike risked escalation. Each retaliation signaled capability. And winter amplified everything. Cold temperatures do not negotiate. They do not pause for diplomacy. When heating systems fail, the impact is immediate and personal. If you want to stay informed about how these strategies unfold, how new systems perform, and how the balance continues to shift in real time, make sure you're subscribed. Because in this conflict, every night can change the equation, and the next update may arrive sooner than anyone expects.